It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
All right. Welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman, and this show is brought to you by emailrevealer.com. You can go to emailrevealer.com and get an autographed copy of my book, How to Become a Successful Private Investigator. Also, too, if you think your spouse is cheating on you, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, we have an online infidelity investigation. That's where you give us their email address, and we trace it back to online dating websites and personal ads and catch them cheating online. Okay. All right. Oh, by the way, yeah, we updated the members section at OppermanReport.com. We just did an update. There was a recent interview I did, and the guest didn't want it aired, so we're putting it up in the members section. But it's going to be like a lost episode, a secret episode with no title. So you can check that out at OppermanReport.com and get secret content now we have up there, top secret information. Okay, our guest today is the author of the book Bush Killing Reagan, The Bush-Hinckley Conspiracy Bill O'Reilly Won't Tell About. Our guest is Niles Mercado, which is a pseudonym. Niles, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, great, man. Welcome to the show, Niles. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Who is Niles Mercado?
Niles Mercado is just a name. It has some relation to my name, but it's just a pseudonym I use in order to put out books on conspiracy theories, things that are very delicate, were connected to my personal profile would make my other businesses a little bit difficult. So I just use that for everything related to conspiracy history. Hey,
before we get started, when I called you on the phone before, do you have the same audio setup as when I called you a minute ago? Yeah.
Are you not hearing this call?
Yeah, you don't sound very good. You sound like you're on a speakerphone or something like that.
Okay. How about now?
I think that's better.
Okay, great.
Oh, yeah, that's much better. Okay, so now I'm looking at your little bio here. You got on because you sent me over this PDF with charts and graphs and all kind of stuff like that, timelines. Where can people get that PDF?
Sure. If you go to sixfigureteen.com/Reagan, so it's spelled out sixfigureteen.com//Reagan, and there you will get basically every diagram that's from the book, but in color format, and then you can follow along with this discussion.
And also, too, if you go there, a six-figure teen or team?
A teen, as in teenager.
Gotcha.
The publishers of the book are also into like teen enablement and finding alternatives to college, which is kind of why I hooked up with them. Okay. Because that is a whole other conspiracy, is the whole college debt system.
Oh yeah, right. Isn't that outrageous? Okay, so you go to this website here, and there'll be a link in the comments and the description. And you can also get a free book about Putin, all the people that Putin's killed.
Right. The 10 people in his so-called Deadpool.
Now, when you were looking into Putin, did you ever look into that whole business about the apartment bombing?
The apartment bombing? I believe, yeah, that is actually in the report. It's been a while since I put that together. That was the first thing I did on the conspiracy investigation side of things.
Yeah, because I'd like to hear more people talking about that apartment bombing. I tried to book a couple of guests on it, and you really can't find anybody that's willing to talk about it, even people that wrote books about it. Now,
it's hard to get information on it. There's more information on the sushi assassination.
Oh, what's the sushi assassination?
Oh, where they found radioactive material in, I believe it was in London, and there was someone who was an outspoken opponent of Putin, and it turned out that he had like a radioactive isotope in his sushi when he was at a restaurant, and that's not just the sort of thing that just happens by accident. So
yeah, right. Okay, now about the author here, it discusses how you've consulted for various government agencies, including the Air Force and the Department of Justice. Can you give us a little elaborate on that?
Yeah, I mean, I try and keep that stuff fairly private, but the reason I started to put that in my bio is just because there's a lot that people sometimes think is incredulous about conspiracy theories. What they don't realize is that the main thing you learn from working with the government is just its compartmentalization, right? That you really don't need to, get a whole agency behind something, because everything is really separated into silos. So it is really easy to get a certain operation through with a certain portion and not have the rest of your agency to even be aware of what's going on.
And so can you give us an idea of how you consulted with the Department of Justice? Like in what area?
I can. I'm sorry.
Okay. All right. Okay. So Niles Mercado. Am I pronouncing that correctly? Mercado?
Yes.
Okay. So now the Bush killing Reagan, the Bush-Hinckley conspiracy, Bill O'Reilly won't tell about, but Niles Mercado will. Give us an overall picture. Why don't you lay out your case for us, what your theory is, and then we'll let you make your case.
Right. So with regard to this particular assassination, the reason why I even put out this book in the first place was just because Killing Reagan was coming out, and I just knew it was going to be filled with misinformation, and from Bill O'Reilly. And so I was even surprised that even the mainstream media even picked at certain aspects of his book, that there were certain items that people from the Reagan administration said were, outright false and that he knew were false and those sort of things. But really, besides all that drama, really I knew that he was going to miss the point that who was really behind it ultimately. And most of the evidence really points to Vice President George Bush, who really had, of course, the most to benefit from a Reagan assassination, and also had extensive family ties to the Hinckley family, as well as business relations with the Hinckley family, as well as political association with the Hinckley family. So I don't know if you want to go into that first, or if if we zoom out, there's kind of a larger overarching thing that has gone on through decades. Okay, so I don't know where you want to start with.
Let's zoom out. That's a good way to put it. So lay the groundwork. How do we get to this by zooming out? How do we get to this?
Okay. Yeah. So the first thing we have to understand is just that the vice presidency, as we understand it today, is a relatively new invention, right? The idea that vice presidents, the way that the line of succession works, the fact that vice presidents get replaced, right? If there is the need for the vice president to step in, that's all stuff that got worked out during the post-Nixon, prior to Nixon resigning and Ford taking over. And the reason why all that changed at that point in history was really because the Rockefellers were really trying to get control of the White House. And so this really goes back to the Truman administration. Now, FDR, he was definitely an old, sick person when he died. But there is some information out there about how at least the Russians believe that he was killed by an intelligence agent. And they were not allowed to see his body, after he had passed. Stalin's delegates were not allowed to, see his body. And there was a lot of information about that. But really, more importantly, when Truman took office, there was no vice president because that's just not how we did things. In fact, a quarter of the history of the United States of America has no vice president filling the office. And so the next in line was the Secretary of State. Now, the Undersecretary of State was, at the time, Nelson Rockefeller, right? And we know that Rockefellers are a very powerful banking family. And we also, it's really interesting because like when you there's so many aspects that you hear about all the time, but then when you hear one extra detail, it puts it into context. So I'm sure you've often heard that like the Nazis, when they were leaving Germany, that a lot of them fled to South America, specifically Argentina and so forth, right? Sure. That's relatively common knowledge. What's not common knowledge is that who was the Undersecretary of Latin America? It was Nelson Rockefeller at the time, right? So the undersecretaries kind of divide up the world for the State Department, right? And so he was getting Nazis brought over to Latin America. Then he was trying to become the Secretary of State so that he would be second in line to be president, so that a Truman assassination would put him in the presidency, right? And so then you roll the clock forward a little bit, and this starts to put into context the House of Un-American Activities committee, which of course that occurred in the House later on. But before that, Joe McCarthy in the Senate he started a lot of people called it a witch hunt, but really he had legitimate concerns about the State Department being filled with what he called communism, right? And of course, Nazism is just a form of communism that's not loyal to Moscow. That's really the only difference between Nazism and communism. And, at least politically at the time. He was really trying to rout out a lot of these agents that had been planted by Nelson Rockefeller while he was Undersecretary of State and over that area of the world. So you roll the clock forward, and Nixon was not the banker's first choice, right? Nelson Rockefeller himself wanted to be president, but eventually he had to realize that people were just not going to vote him there. And there's even a quote from his one of his ex-wives saying that he knew that that the American electorate would never put him into office. He'd have to get there some other way. So this is really a true House of Cards situation. In fact, there's even a reference in House of Cards to one of Nelson Rockefeller's initiatives to have a bridge, I believe, from Connecticut to Long Island. And so there is that little tie-in with that series. And so, so Nelson Rockefeller was eventually arranged for Nixon to be taken down. And when Ford went into place, he was put in as the vice president. During his vice presidency, there were two attempts on the life of Ford, right?
Right.
And two failed attempts, right? Both with ties to MK Ultra, right? Because at least one of the both of the shooters had ties to the Manson family.
Yeah, one of them was Squeaky Fromm. Yeah.
Go ahead.
One of them was Squeaky Fromm, who took a shot at him from a distance. But let me back up a second, back to McCarthy. Sure. Now, did McCarthy ever mention Rockefeller by name out loud in a speech or anything like that?
No. I think he understood the ramifications of doing so. The Rockefellers were extremely powerful outside of politics, in the banking sector. So he did not do that. But I mean, that's usually how things are done, right? Where, when pressure is being put on, they usually don't name the top people. You know what I mean? They usually.
And then what about Roy Cohn? Roy Cohn, was he an ally of Rockefeller in New York, or were they enemies?
Was who an ally?
Roy Cohn.
Roy Cohn.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with the name.
Sure. Roy Cohn was McCarthy's right-hand man. He's like his little thug there. He's became a big lawyer in New York.
Right.
So Roy Cohn, yeah. I'm from New York.
Right. Yeah. You're from New York. Very cool.
So were they ever allies or were they enemies? Do you know?
No, I think that they were. I'm not sure about that. I'm not. Okay. I have to look that up. I have to look at that.
And then where did we leave off before I backtracked? Where were we again?
Sure. Yeah. So two attempts on Ford's life, right?
Squeaky
and
Fromm.
So Nelson was unsuccessful. Again?
Squeaky Fromm, the Manson girl.
Right, one of them, the Manson girl, and then the other one also had a tie to Manson as well. It was more tangential. I believe they were both from the same town in West Virginia or something like that. So yeah, they were both from the same small town, and they grew up together and they knew each other growing up. So
really?
That's more than a coincidence. Yeah. And so after all that, right, and yeah, she was an inch away, and like there was some irregularity with her gun that the cops took her actual gun because she got tied up with local law enforcement and then had to use a different gun that drew to the right by 1 inch. So she really would have been successful, most likely, had she had her own gun.
The importance of that, though, is that because when Ford was president, they made Nelson Rockefeller vice president.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, obviously, Ford did not have a strong political base, right? So, Ford was not he was not a freedom fighter per se. He was just going along with he was very much go along to get along type of guy. And so he was fine with bringing Nelson Rockefeller on to bring the money with him and to bring the support, that made his confirmation, once he agreed to do that, it made his confirmation really swift. So, but what's interesting is that he drops Nelson Rockefeller, right, after the two assassination attempts, right, which is a very unusual thing to do, to drop your vice president, right, especially when there was no public scandal surrounding Nelson Rockefeller that required such a change. But I believe that he understood that that Nelson Rockefeller was after his life so that he could become president.
Wait, let me ask you then. Who did Ford choose as his VP when he was running for a second term?
Very good question. It was Bob Dole.
Okay. Oh, really?
Now, yes. He ran with Bob Dole, and Bob Dole was never a big fan of the Bush family. Yeah. And so he ran with Bob Dole, and of course, obviously lost. After that,
wait, one second. I hate to keep interrupting. I apologize. But just a little bit more groundwork. You got to remember, Ford was on the Warren Commission that gave out that report on the JFK assassination. And then when Nixon was removed, before they could get rid of Nixon, and many people think that was a coup as well. We had Len Kolodny on the show many times and written great books about it. they had to get rid of Spiro Agnew first. So, and they got rid of Spiro Agnew by these IRS charges. So they get rid of Agnew first. Yeah, right. They put in Ford, and then Ford pardons Nixon, and then Ford brings in his VP, Nelson Rockefeller, which is the most suspicious thing out of all of this. I totally agree with you on that.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, one more question, too. Now, wasn't there a thing, too, where one of the Rockefellers back in New York, he had a job like as the deputy governor or the deputy mayor, and he was getting paid $1 a year, but his office was bigger than the mayor? Anything about that, do you know?
No, I'm not familiar with that.
Okay,
but yeah, obviously their power structure was in New York.
Yeah. Okay, I might be misremembering who it was, but I'm pretty sure it was one of the Rockefellers. So then that's laying the groundwork. Then yeah. So that taxing was phony, right? Even though he did plead just to make it go away, he also wrote a book saying that he was set up and that that was all phony and all that. Oh, really?
So Spiro Agnew himself wrote a book where he tried to clear his name on that issue. So he, and when you think about what the Clintons have done, the idea that he got picked up on some minor, IRS irregularity to the tune of $100,000 is just obscene.
It was a different world back then. How old are you? Because I was alive during all that stuff. I was, I'm 55 years old. So I was,
Yeah, I'm in my mid 30s, so okay, I have to get most of this from books and videos and so forth.
Because I remember even as a kid saying, "Hey, what's going on here? Why do they had to get rid of Agnew first?" And everyone knew Rockefeller because the old what was it, the Birch Society, John Birch Society. Everybody knew about the Rockefellers being the dangerous characters. So okay, but I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Right, and that's one thing you have to understand too, right? Is that Nixon tried to maintain control of the White House, right? Have his guys there. And all the Rockefeller appointees were outside of the White House, right? Mm-hmm. So he said, all right, fine, you can control all the agencies, but the White House is like my personal space. And so he pushed the Rockefellers off to that degree. And then, of course, we have the tapes and, there was the naval intelligence and all that infiltrated. But in general, the agency heads were all Rockefeller men. And then the White House appointees were all Nixon guys. Okay. And so the IRS is what was used to turn against Spiro Agnew to make the place for Ford, which then made the place for Nelson Rockefeller.
And then they start shooting at Ford. And in your book, too, you get into how they were shooting at Jimmy Carter, too, because they wanted to get rid of Carter so that he could run against Mondale?
Right. Well, obviously, George Bush versus Mondale would have been a very easy would have been much easier than against Jimmy Carter. And again, the Reagan nomination was not something that was assured, and so that was not the plan of the banks. And that's one thing you have to understand is that the Bush family is usually tied to oil, but they're really a banking family. And their oil operations are really an outgrowth of their CIA dealings more than their actual business. Yeah.
Yeah, right. They had a ship called Zapata that was an Operation Zapata was involved with the Bay of Pigs. A very remarkable coincidence there.
Right. And you can actually there's a pretty good documentary called The Dark Legacy that's on that. It is from a very left wing perspective, but it's still a very good documentary. And they bring up that connection of Zapata oil. Now, Zapata oil was also tied to the Hinckley as well. So if we want to start getting into this case, well, before that, though, what about, because Bush is one of the big guys in your theory here. What did you come up with? You hear these stories about Bush being involved with the JFK assassination and his name coming up the next day and stuff. Right. So, and another point on the JFK thing I just wanted to bring up was just about the Warren Commission, right? And so how Ford, you mentioned that Ford was on the Warren Commission, right?
Right.
And so that's part of the reason why they knew that he could be trusted to be the president. And the same pattern occurred with the 9/11 Commission, right? If you look at who the big players were in the 9/11 Commission, Nancy Pelosi was on the 9/11 Commission, as was Vice President Biden, right before he was vice president.
Oh, really?
And so after 9/11 Commission, she goes to become Speaker of the House, and he becomes vice president. Now, getting back to your rolling back to your question, though, I think Dark Legacy does a really good job on the front of any connections between, the Bushes in the JFK assassination. And in terms of where that connects with this is really the point. The contact point is about the oil. But yeah, that documentary does a really good job of that for anyone that wants to pursue that angle.
You know, one of the people they floated to run the 9/11 Commission too was Henry Kissinger.
Right.
Can you imagine
exactly, that? Which is just so absurd. But it's funny because the general public just sees Henry Kissinger as like, oh, he's been around and he's like a regular fixture kind of guy. You know what I mean? They just don't understand about Memorandum 200 or any of the other dealings he's done, you know?
Right. Okay. Now, what about another question, too, that I often ask people is Nixon. You know, obviously he was up to speed on what happened at JFK, and then he brings into his White House his own little secret police there. All these guys, all the Watergate burglars and stuff like that, like Sturgis and them, you know, were all involved in the JFK assassination. What would motivate him to bring in all these guys who just killed a previous president?
Right. Well, see, right there, I think you're making an assumption that's not the case because he had. It's my understanding. Okay, one thing we have to understand is that burglary was all a farce. Right. It didn't exist. The wiretapping, by the way, there did not exist. Right. Like they claimed that there was wiretapping. They went and searched everywhere. They said there was no wiretapping. Then a little while later, they were told to go and check again. Like, oh, go check that phone again. And then sure enough, there was a wiretapping machine. So really all that and there's a whole bunch of aspects of that event. So like the doors were taped, right? So that they wouldn't have to so that they wouldn't have any problem getting out. You know what I mean? And but they got away, and there never really was any wiretapping done, and that only appeared later. So that was really an attempt to bring down Nixon, I believe, from the Rockefeller, because those, like you said, those were all Rockefeller men. Those were all banker guys with connections to the Bushes and to
they had more connections to Bushes and Bay Pigs. Also, with the Watergate was that Shockley, that top cop, was his day off, and he just happened to be parked out in front to come in there and arrest everybody. But I've interviewed so many people involved with Watergate and Bay Pigs. Frank Sturgis's nephew, who was his alibi, by the way, for the JFK assassination day, and E. Howard Hunt's son.
You mean for one of his explanations, right? Because he has like multiple. Over the years, he's been interviewed and given multiple details about where he was.
Yeah, Jim Hunt is a law professor down in Texas right now. I've had him on the show a couple of times, and he's a nephew. Oh, you got to hear the stories he tells about Sturgis, man. About how Sturgis had his own B-25 bomber plane and his own bomber jet. Okay. And then he went and he dropped bombs on top of the palace in Haiti because the president owed money to the mafia. He's got making their own. Anyway, he's got great stories. But the question I always ask this guy, and I asked E. Howard Hunt's son too as well, St. John Hunt. How could this be? Here you got some of the guys, Operation 40, some of the top assassins on the planet at the time, and they're doing this job, and a couple of cops show up, and they're just going to put their hands up and say, "Okay, we give up." You know what I'm saying?
Right.
That makes no sense.
Right. Well, sometimes you don't know whether it's a planned bungling, like the Watergate was most certainly a planned bungling, where they were planning to be caught. Or then it's just sometimes, time and, unforeseen occurrence just happens sometimes, right. They aren't all powerful, even though they do seem to run the show most of the time. That doesn't mean they're all powerful, you know what I mean? And it doesn't mean they're all united either. So a lot of times they will, trip up each other's operations, just to get a leg within their community. It's not like there's this happy, united group of banking interests. They're all 100% united against everyone else. They war with each other as well.
Are you familiar with the theory that the Watergate burglary was to get the little black book about the Hollywood, the DC Madam, and even there's a lot of Mo Dean, Dean's wife was involved with that escort service. Are you familiar with that whole theory?
Yeah. Right. I have heard that. I'm big with Key Bono and with the context of what happens after the fact. And it's pretty clear that the Rockefellers were trying to muscle their way into the White House. Okay. And so I kind of see everything in that context, especially since all of Rockefeller's men were appointed to the agencies that were responsible for bringing down Spiro Agnew and then ultimately bringing down Nixon.
I got you.
Yeah.
Okay, so then where did we leave off in the chronology then?
Okay, so we haven't really gotten to the Bush-Hinckley connection part of everything. So there's kind of two real interesting areas. One is, of course, all the things that happened the day of the shooting, right? And there was a lot of break of procedure, right? Where the limo was moved after Reagan gets out to go to the DC hotel,
right.
And when he comes out, he's having to go walk 40 feet down the road, that sort of thing. And then of course the news coverage and all like that. But I think that the most interesting part to me is just the connection, the copious amount of connections between the Bushes and the Hinckleys. So I don't know if that's something you want to get into at this point.
Before we get into that, the connections between Bushes and Hinckley. Okay. Before we get into that, though, have you ever seen that video? And I've only seen it once or twice, where it looks like one of the Secret Service agents is swapping out the gun that was on the floor.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But the thing about it is that the guns that were at the scene were not the ones that were used on Reagan, right?
Okay.
Because if you see the videos slowed down, you can see that Reagan is responding to being shot at the same time that Hinckley is shooting one of his Secret Service agents.
Oh, really?
And yeah. And also too, if you see the angle of all of his shots, none of them could have hit Reagan. Also too, the cut in Reagan was not a gunshot wound. It was a small slit, right? That would be consistent with the entrance wound of a small disc. That's why we have a picture in the report I'm having your listeners download, is where they show this special gun issued by the CIA, where they're able to send these little discs quietly with CO2 pressure, and everyone described it as a little disc that was in Reagan. They tried to explain this by ricocheting. They're saying the bullet ricocheted in the limo and then deformed into a disc and then went into Reagan. That's the official story.
Yeah, right. They said it hit the limo, it flattened out, and then went into Reagan. Yeah, you're right. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, it is ridiculous. Well, and especially too because in some scenario it could be possible, but with the bullets that were used at the time for that type of gun, they were made to be very hard, so they would shatter, but they would deform, right? And so it doesn't meet with the type of ammunition, and it's just not consistent with it. And also too, the timing is off on the video when you see the shot taking place.
Now, I remember watching this on TV that day, and I was always suspicious of things already by that point. And they were saying that these are some kind of special exploding bullets, or like, right? And when they were doing the surgery, they didn't realize that these were these fancy exploding bullets. And one of the things that always struck me as odd is because they were saying, well, they knew that these were like exploding, like they knew that. No, they didn't know that. Like they couldn't look in the guy's gun or whatever, or his hotel room, find his bullets. But they already knew about Jodie Foster. They already were talking about Jodie Foster before they knew what kind of bullets were in the President of the United States. How does that come up? So, what about? You familiar with the news accounts of exploding bullets they were talking about?
Yeah. But the only problem is that there was no. That's not what Reagan experienced, right? Like Reagan didn't have an exploding bullet. Reagan, they weren't even sure if he was shot when he was in the emergency room. They thought he was having a heart attack because they couldn't find the entrance wound, right? Then eventually one of the nurses sees, there's this little black. I guess his blood had turned black, and there was a small amount of it dried up. And that's where they saw to start to operate and to do the X-rays. They required 3 X-rays to even find this bullet. So there's no exploding bullet when it came to Reagan. That's just not what his wounds were, even by the official story. But what's interesting about the Jodie Foster thing is that that's a common thing that you see where a ridiculous motive is put out as part of the news coverage, right? And so, the same thing happened with the John Lennon shooting. They said he thought that Lennon was a phony. And then with the RFK thing, it was a newspaper article in his shirt pocket about Kennedy's plan to sell bombers to Israel. The only problem with that is that the Sirhan was I believe, a Seventh-day Adventist. He was a Christian. So why would he care about, he would have no gripe with Israel. You know what I mean? It fit the picture of Sirhan, but not the reality,
Hey, I got this INS document about Sirhan that talks about how he attended parties over at Sharon Tate's house, drug and sex parties. I'll send it to you after the show.
Send it to me, please.
Yeah. I got it from Maury Terry, who now I'm hearing he got it from Ed Sanders. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but I got it from Maury Terry. He wrote the book The Ultimate Evil, right, with the whole process church stuff. Yeah, so there was a process.
Yeah, and one thing you need to listen to too is there's a long tape of Nina Rhodes Hughes being I don't even want to say interrogated because it's way worse than that. The police are badgering her about changing her story about a second shooter. So that's something to look into too. And they go on for 18 minutes. And at the end of it, she finally breaks down and she's like, they're telling her, you're going to upset the Kennedy family. They just lost 2 of their family members. And, they're laying it on so thick. And eventually she changes her story.
Yeah. And you got to think too, with the whole thing with the RFK, that then they tear down. First of all, they lose the door jam, all that stuff with the bullet holes. They lose all that, but then they tear down the Ambassador Hotel, which should have been a landmark anyway if there wasn't a murder there. But then they just tear down the hotel like it's nothing.
Yeah, that's a common thing with the. Oh man, I always forget the name of the shooting that everyone thinks was fake in the Northeast. I forget the name of it.
Sandy Hook? Sandy Hook, yeah.
Sandy Hook, yeah. The same thing there. That elementary school is demolished. Let's just get rid of it. No one can go there and do videos or anything,
And it's always interesting, too, to me that the house of Ariel Castro, who had those 3 girls kidnapped in that house for all that time, and that story was just so bizarre, and that they destroyed that house, too, and put a little park there in the middle of a row houses, of a neighborhood. Let's just tear down a house because it's just so bizarre.
Right.
So now we were going to.
Then with 9/11, they quickly got all the debris out of there and shipped it to China.
Right. And the first World Trade Center bombing, they gave it all to John Gotti's son-in-law for him to sell. You can't get any better than this stuff. But now back to Jodie Foster for a quick second. Now there's recordings too of Hinckley talking to Jodie Foster, which sound very bizarre. Have you listened to those?
No, I don't even think that they're real, frankly.
Oh, really?
That's a whole other subject. Yeah, when we're researching one of our other books, the Oregon shooting, okay. You realize how much stuff gets faked, and I don't know. I'd have to hear it again. But I remember looking into that, and I think the connection with Jodie Foster was just fabricated. And it's certainly a lot easier to understand. Like, oh, he's obsessed with Jodie Foster, and so he killed someone. But I mean, it's such an easy way to divert from the actual family connection.
Right. Now, so back to the family connection. That's where we kind of left off there. Now, I guess that sort of starts. Because the way that all first came out was because the news report came out like the next day about how Neil Bush was going to have dinner with the brother of Hinckley's brother. Now, has that been confirmed?
Yes, actually, that's mainstream news, right? They only reported it once on NBC, but the way they tried to frame it, right, was that that they didn't really know each other, that this was going to be like a first meeting, that sort of thing, and that they canceled because of news of the shooting. But that's really not the case. They canceled their meeting based on the fact that it became public that they were having the meeting. That's why they canceled, But it did come out that they did have a planned meeting. That was on NBC. They aired it once.
And it's interesting. Neil Bush is one of the secret Bushes you really don't hear about. Or unless when he's stealing from savings and loans. And the other one, Marvin Bush, was over there at the what do you call it? 9/11.
I think Marvin ran the security, right, for 9/11, or he was on the board of one of those security companies.
Yeah, and he also had a very, you know the story about him where his housekeeper or his maid got run over by her own car in front of the house?
No, but that's not strange or anything. That happens all the time, right? You know?
I know, man. I know. That's it.
I've had to switch maids 3 or 4 times because they're constantly running themselves over with their own car. You know?
That's right. Well, you know, there was a hill, you know. And what about? I hate to get a little too wild here, but what do you think of that theory about Barbara Bush dating Aleister Crowley?
I haven't heard that. I think I'm allergic to stories about Barbara Bush's sex life. You know,
no, it was Barbara Bush's mother, Piermont or something like that. I forget. Who dated Aleister Crowley? There is something to it. She actually lived there in France at the same time. She was living in the same house as Aleister Crowley, George Bush's mother-in-law. And if you look at, find some young pictures of the Bush brothers, the 4 horsemen, you know, the 4 Bush sons, you know, and find them when they're like in their 20s. And they got a real serious resemblance to a young Aleister Crowley. So, and even Barbara Bush does too, if you look at their features and stuff. But okay, we're getting a little too far.
Well, yeah. I think that's definitely true on the Clinton side. That's definitely not his kid. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's right. Well, Clinton's got his own problems. Now, what did you come up with the connections between Bush and Hinckley dynasties?
Okay, so not to get into family trees and everything, but they're cousins, right? They're like 7th cousins, right? Which I know is fairly removed, but I have no cousin connection to any of these people, right? It's not like everyone has the 7th cousin connection. You know? So that's a little something, right? But then you go beyond that, their business dealings, right, are really involved. I mean, they're as closely tied business-wise as you can get. And the reason is because remember getting back to Zapata Oil, right? Which again was really like a CIA front, right? There was like a CIA money laundering type front situation. And Zapata Oil bails out Vanderbilt Oil, right? Because they had run it into the ground, so to speak. And that's when it became Vanderbilt Energy. And John Hinckley Sr. was president of Vanderbilt Oil. And so that's one very strong connection, right? You know, George Bush's oil company bailed out John Hinckley's oil company. Right. So that's one right there. Then the next significant thing that John Hinckley Sr. was involved in was World Vision, which is its own subject. And World Vision got funds via the USAID, and the State Department, and through the CIA. So Bush was heading the CIA while funneling money to World Vision, right? And World Vision is connected to both the John Lennon shooting and to this shooting, to the Bush killing Reagan shooting.
Now, describe what World Vision was. Wasn't it like a Christian, what's that called?
Okay.
Yeah.
Christian outreach or something like that.
Yeah, it's a missionary.
Yeah, I guess you could call it that. Its relationship to Christ is definitely non-existent. But one thing you have to understand, right, is that there's a reason why the CIA funds these outreach groups that basically handle refugees, right?
Right.
And because think about what interest does CIA have in that? That's like a UNICEF. That's like a UNICEF thing or a charitable thing, right? The reason is because refugee camps are the perfect recruitment center for assets, right? Because you have distressed people, usually fleeing regime that they are opposed to, right? And it's just a perfect place to pick up intelligence assets, right? And in the case of World Vision, both Mark David Chapman, who killed John Lennon, and John Hinckley Jr., who shot Reagan, they both did outreach work together with the Vietnamese with Vietnamese refugees in Laos, and then also I think also in the United States.
Right.
And so they are handling Vietnamese refugees. And then it's just kind of strange that both of them ended up becoming famous assassins or attempted assassins.
Yeah, and both carrying Catcher in the Rye, but have this obsession with Catcher in the Rye. Which may be part of the because remember too, another common thread between Mark David Chapman and John Hinckley Jr. was the ending up in mental wards right before the shooting, right? And mental wards are more or less controlled by the government. I mean, they're funded largely by the government. So
I believe Mark David Chapman ended up in a Hawaii mental ward before he shot Lennon, and then John Hinckley Jr. ended up after him stalking Carter, he ended up in a Colorado mental facility, and then shortly after he's released, goes and shoots Reagan, or I shouldn't say shoots Reagan, but is involved in the shooting of Reagan. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, and the shooting with Hinckley is kind of suspicious too as well, because I had another guest on the show once, Rod Farrell, who counted all the bullet holes. He found all, because there's no, you can't get a lot of the police reports; it's all sealed. But he got all the videos and all the news clippings, and counted all the bullet holes in the windows and the jacket everywhere. And there's more bullet holes than there are bullets in the gun. There's just no way around it.
There is really no way around that, and there's a reason too why that occurs, right?
Okay.
Because that's one thing about this MK Ultra stuff, right? It's usually presented in a very cartoony way, like, oh, they have, like as if mind control is doing some real advanced control of the person.
Yeah.
But really, the CIA failed in a lot of its attempts for advanced mind control. And what they settled on was that it's fairly easy to create a patsy. In other words, someone you can put in a place and wipe their memory afterwards, right? Mm-hmm. And so that they're incoherent when they're picked up and no one asks too many questions, right? So that's what they were successful at achieving. And I believe that is what the Catcher in the Rye connection is just simply that book was just used for programming, because they have people repeat phrases over and over and over again. And I don't think there's anything from the content of the book itself that caused them to go shoot people, which is kind of how it was presented,
Well, didn't J.D. Salinger, when he moved to that little town, like he bought up all the copies and made sure that there were no copies sold in that town?
Yeah, I think he didn't want to see it when he was out and about or something.
Oh, maybe
like
that was it. Okay. Now, what about Scientology? Does Hinckley have a Scientology connection? Because Chapman certainly did.
Right, Chapman did. I haven't seen that with Hinckley. I haven't seen that come up. But they're, but they knew each other and they worked at World Vision, obviously.
Oh, wait, you're saying that Chapman and Hinckley knew each other?
Yes, that's what I'm trying to say. They both worked for World Vision, which was headed by John Hinckley Sr. and funded by the CIA, and other government agencies that gave them money to handle refugees.
No, I know they both were associated with World Vision, but was it at the same time? And isn't that a big organization with a lot of different locations all over the world? Were they in the same location?
It is a big location. That's why in the diagram in our book we do have a dotted line for Hinckley, because it's where Mark David Chapman was is more establishable. But there is a reference to them being together in Laos, but we weren't able to confirm it, so we have a dotted line connection in our diagram.
Okay, that's very interesting. And one of the things too that struck me about Chapman was when you hear about this art collection, like here's this guy supposed to be working as a security guard, and he's got this massive art collection worth thousands and thousands of dollars. What about Hinckley? Did he have funds that people couldn't explain?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, the two main investigatory precepts are, qui bono, who benefits, and follow the money, right? And so with John Hinckley, what's interesting is that all the time that he was chasing down Carter, right, and going from place to place, and contacting lots of people as well, because they made it like he was a lone person. Right. But, there's a lot of people talking about him being on the phone and all that. And in the news reports, they say that he was given money, that he got money from his parents and other sources. But they never look into what are the other sources. Where was, because this man never produced a product, never worked, that we can see. But they talked about him getting money from multiple sources, and they never chased that down. So yeah, he was being funded through the whole time he was stalking Carter and planning the Reagan shooting.
That stuff's not cheap. It's not cheap to fly around, stay in motels, feed yourself. It's not cheap, to be on the road.
I mean, if you had to stop what you're doing right now and go and just, I know you do investigative work for your business.
Sure.
I'm still trying to decide whether cheating on your mate or political assassination was worse. But yeah, if you had to do that without clients and go around the country, right?
Right.
You'd run out of money pretty quick, right?
Right. Hey, what about now? I have a theory that Chapman, there was two Chapmans in New York that weekend, running around New York. One was a calm guy, and one was a very agitated guy. Did you ever have any indications that there was a Hinckley double running around?
A Hinckley double, not in the Hinckley's case, right? Because, but one thing that there was that he did appear to be in more than one place at once, right? Okay. Because there were reports about him being in more than one place, but not necessarily as a double. I think the way I interpret that is not that he had a double, but as much as he was working with a handler. You know what I mean?
Gotcha. Okay, so he met. And what were the more than one places he was documented at?
This is when he was in D.C., like leading up to the shooting. He's supposed to be at the hotel, and I forget the other location. But he's supposed to be at a payphone at the hotel, at a payphone at a restaurant, and at the hotel, I believe, at the same time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And his phone records of him being at that payphone?
Yeah. Well, the phone records are okay. The phone records at his hotel are more set because they were his hotel room, right? But he made multiple. They said about a half a dozen local calls from his hotel room, and then so from the payphone, I think the time periods are a little bit off, so I'm not exactly sure that they've ever made that public. I don't think we were trying to find those records, and we had trouble finding that.
And who was he calling?
Well, he was probably talking to his handlers, because remember, too, there was the one part we kind of glossed over was just that when the first of the shooting, there was an NBC correspondent saying that there was a shooter on the roof. Right. And so she interpreted that as being a Secret Service agent, but I mean, visually a Secret Service agent is someone just someone in a suit, right? With a gun. And so, so there was obviously some coordination that had to be done, between having your patsy, and that's the question too, whether John Hinckley Jr. was even aware of exactly what was going to happen that day. Because a lot of times in this case, it's a little bit interesting because normally the patsies are not also the family members of powerful people, right?
Right.
But remember too, Hinckley Jr. was kind of the black sheep of the family, you know what I mean? And sometimes the black sheep becomes president in the case of George W. Bush. And then other cases, like in this one, they put them up as a sacrificial lamb, which, if you're, I try not to get into too much of the religious aspect of these people, the occult stuff, because it's pretty sick. Okay. But that is an aspect of that, is that idea of putting your child through the fire or sacrificing your child,
right,
is something that gives you status in that community. So you do see that pop up from time to time.
Okay, I think there's a huge occult connection to the Chapman case. What occult connection did you come up with these Hinkleys?
Okay, well, the only reason I bring that up is just because of a lot of times people will object when they're hearing about John Hinckley Jr. and the family's involvement. It's like, well, okay, if they were going to assassinate him, why would they put their own child through that? Right. You know what I mean? Like, why would they? Why wouldn't they just use someone else? And so that's kind of how I make sense of it, is that, that is part of cult practice, is that sacrificing of your child. Sure. And, that's happened throughout the ages where, powerful people would do that. But in terms of Hinckley, that the other thing we have to understand too, is that he didn't go to jail. Okay. Let's be clear here, right? He went to like a luxurious, mental facility. Right. You know what I mean? That was a country club life that is better than the way 99% of the world lives. You know what I mean? So it wasn't like they were really, putting him in a situation where he was going to suffer. And, he's a free man today. He walks the streets, John Hinckley Jr. And so, they were putting him into a kind of controlled facility, and he was kind of the black sheep of the family anyway. So it wasn't like he was going to, head Vanderbilt Energy anytime soon.
Right. And, to successfully litigate a insanity defense is impossible. I think it's like less than 1%. It's like, it's a hopeless defense. But here we had this guy pull it off, and then it became like, well, they all do it, and they all play in insanity to get off their murder charges. This is like it's some kind of common thing that actually works when it doesn't, not even a little bit. You can't even get someone
right. And I believe that during the time of the shooting, he was in one of the few jurisdictions that even allowed that defense. Like now it's commonplace. but I believe that DC was one of the few places that even allowed that. But also too on the legal end, maybe in the next hour, if we want to get into that a little bit more, because there's a lot of connections on the legal end, how he was defended, how he was prosecuted, in terms of who was brought in for that. Right.
Right. Okay. Right. I know what you're talking about. Now, were there any other attempts on Reagan, though, prior to this?
Prior to this, there was nothing. Remember, too, you have to understand that this is the first 90 days of him being president.
Okay.
Right. So they wanted to get control really quickly because of Reagan's opposition. Remember, in the primaries, he was extremely opposed to the Trilateral Commission, right? And called out George Bush Sr. for being part of that. And then George Bush Sr. tries to blow it off and say, oh, well, when I ran for office, I broke all my business ties, to all my business organizations, because he was trying to make it like it was just a business thing. And so right from the beginning, he was really opposing their agenda. And within 90 days, they made this attempt on his life. And, we can get into more in terms of like the impact that had on the administration.
Yeah, there was a whole thing, too, about how Ford almost became his vice president. Remember that? Before he picked Bush, he was almost going to pick Ford. And it was it was a chaos at the convention because he didn't have anybody picked. Yeah, but then Ford wanted too much power. He wanted to be co-president. Some kind of crazy thing like that.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's how Reagan thought that people would view it, as a co-president. And so he knew that he had to accommodate the banking interests somehow. And but he thought that would be too much. But if he took George Bush, he thought that George Bush Sr. was a lot less likable and that he would be a lot easier to manage. And so that was kind of like the lesser of two evils, because it would have just been too overwhelming having two people referred to as Mr. President, in power.
Okay, so we're here with Niles Mercado, and I just opened up this thing here because I want to get this PDF that you sent me here. What was it called again? I got it. Sixfigureteen.com. And you put a /Reagan, REAGAN, but you'll have that. It'll be in the description, and it'll be in the description and the comments. The book we're talking about today is Bush Killing Reagan, the Bush-Hinckley Conspiracy Bill O'Reilly Won't Tell About. Did you get any grief from Bill O'Reilly for putting his name in your title?
Actually, I did. We got complaints from their publisher.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And our title was suppressed. So if you see two different covers of the book, that's why we had to change our cover and change a few other things. We had to change the subtitle and the cover.
Hey, what made you get into this whole thing? What first got your hair up when you saw this?
Well, the first book I wrote was When Prosecutors Attack.
Okay.
And it was, we can get into that at some point, but basically the growing up around the O.J. Simpson trial, and seeing how one-sided the media coverage was on that. That's really what kind of first made me question all this stuff. And then once you start pulling the thread, you start realizing, all the conspiracies behind this stuff.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that title. I didn't know that was you. And the O.J. case is a weird galore too, man. There's all kinds of connections to Scientology with the O.J. bunch around there. It also ties to drug running, which is really interesting. We can get into that. Oh, yeah. Well, I'm going to have you back. Well, let's just cover today all this stuff here. We're with Niles Mercado, Bush Killing Reagan, the Bush-Hinckley Conspiracy, Bill O'Reilly Won't Tell You About. We'll be right back after this little break here.
And now a word from our sponsors. Remember, all these shows on Awake are brought to you by emailrevealer.com. You can go to emailrevealer.com and get a copy of my book, How to Become a Successful Private Investigator. But you also do all kinds of different services for you. An online dating service investigation. It's called an online infidelity investigation. And that's where you give us your husband or your boyfriend, your girlfriend's email address, and we trace it back to their online dating websites, and we return a list of all the dating sites that email is registered to. We can expand on that investigation and trace it back to porn sites, escort service sites, swinger sites, gambling websites, and even prescription drug websites. If you think your ex-husband or something is addicted to prescription medication, or involved in an extreme online pornography addiction, we can produce a report for you that you can use in court. Adoption investigations. If you want to locate your birth parents or your birth child you gave away for adoption, we can do adoption investigations for you. Asset searches for you. Locate bank accounts, hidden assets, hidden properties, hidden income, all different kinds of services in the asset search investigation. Email tracing. If you need to locate or identify somebody from just an email address, we can do an email trace investigation for you. And all kinds of digital forensics, computer and cell phone digital forensics, where we can recover deleted content from an email or a hard drive and produce a report for you that you can use in court. That's emailrevealer.com, or you can contact me at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com.
You can have your ad played here at oppermanreport.com every Friday night, 5 p.m., and Saturday night, 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And on Friday nights, too, we do a live portion for 1 hour that I just do a live monologue. The ads are very, very inexpensive, and they're also played in the Opperman Report member section. In the member section, you can find all kinds of exclusive content that you won't find anywhere else. It's as cheap as $6 a month, $20 a quarter, or $75 for a year. If you contact me directly at oppermanreport@gmail.com, I'll set you up with a little special deal there where you get a discount if you PayPal me directly, and you even get a copy of my book. I want to thank Sean Duff at strawmanmusic.com. He's an excellent musician. And I also want to thank William Ramsey, who helps us produce the show and book guests, who's an excellent author at William Ramsey Investigates on YouTube.
Don't forget, this show is brought to you by pscoco.com. Phoebe Sod is an independent curator with the Cocoa Exchange. The Cocoa Exchange is formerly known as Dove Chocolate Discoveries, and they make the finest silky smooth chocolate because the products start with the best cocoa beans, which are tested for quality and flavor by expert technicians. The Cocoa Exchange offers not just premium chocolates, but anything from sauces and spices to brownie and cake mixes, and even coffee and martini mixes. If you wish to treat yourself or someone you love to a sweet and tasty gift, then the Cocoa Exchange is the brand for you. So you go to pscoco.com, you click on the Shop Now button. You can see all their beautiful chocolates. You can order it right now tonight. It could be in your mailbox in a couple of days. Or if you want to get into the chocolate business, you want to be a chocolatier just like Phoebe Sod, click the Contact Us button, and you can learn how to get your own website, go into the cocoa chocolate business, and sell chocolate and make a little bit of money there. I want to welcome our newest sponsor, SubashTechnosis.com. Subash Technosis is a search engine optimization and website design company. They're located in India, so you know you're going to save a lot of money and get top quality service. They offer all sorts of business process outsourcing, data entry, banking BPO services, recruitment process outsourcing, software testing, offshoring research network, customer care, press release, content writing and distribution, and much, much more. Now you can get a hold of Subash Technosis by email at info@subashtechnosis.com. Their website is www.subashtechnosis.com, and their Skype is ANUSHASUBASH.
It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome back to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. We're here today with Niles Mercado. And the book we're talking about, wait, we're all over the place. Talking about OJ a minute ago. I definitely got to have you back. I'm really enjoying this. Bush Killing Reagan, the Bush-Hinckley Conspiracy. Bill O'Reilly won't tell you about it, because Bill O'Reilly, he's in that shower with those loofahs, man. He's too busy. One night I read that whole lawsuit about him in the shower with the loofahs. You're familiar with that, right?
Yeah, I don't get all that stuff, all the Me Too stuff. I have a very weird perspective on all that, but okay. That's all the story.
Well, I got to tell you, I read the whole thing, and people thought I made it up. I says, no, man, go to Smoking Gun. You can read the documents right there. Now, one of the things in this PDF you sent me over here, And let me remind people where to find that again. It's over at the
sixfigureteen.com.
Yeah, sixfigureteen.com/Reagan. Now, you sent me this thing, and it talks about how the trial balloon was John Lennon, that assassination. Then the target assassination was John Hinckley and Ronald Reagan. And then the media distraction was the assassination on the Pope. What do you have on that?
Right. So I think that this is a format that you see a lot. You know, when people say things happen in threes.
Right.
And I think part of the reason is because of this idea, right? Let's work out the kinks of the trial balloon. Let's get the one done. And let's get people to stop talking about it with the third one, right? And what's interesting is that Mark David Chapman might have actually been a consideration to assassinate Gerald Ford as well, because he became program director. He became the key aide to program director David Moore over at the World Vision Association, right?
Right.
And so he was actually in meetings with Gerald Ford, shaking his hands, and I believe they have pictures of that. And so, you know, the guy who killed Lennon was in a room shaking hands with Gerald Ford. And so they ended up using him for the John Lennon, you know, to be a patsy for John Lennon, which had a lot of similar aspects, right? Like one of the big ones too is, like you said, about the gun, not the more bullets firing than could have came from the gun, right? Then there's also too where he had, for John Lennon, there were multiple gunshots were in the same wound, which is usually a sign of a very skilled rifleman, right? And not someone with a handgun just shooting off at close distance. And the main reason of it is really because of the limitation of mind control. It's really not as advanced as some people think, but they can make someone a patsy, but then that means they can't reliably be a shooter. So you need to have a secondary shooter to back up, and really you just need them. If you can get them to fire a gun at all, just to have the bullet sounds coming from them, then they're happy with that. But a lot of times they don't even have GSM. They haven't even fired. So yeah, so that one is very similar. And then we know that just like a very short amount of time afterwards was the failed attempts on the Pope John Paul II, which may have been just used as a distraction.
And that's so interesting too, because the guys around that Pope John Paul assassination, also later on, they were connected to the World Trade Center bombing, and then all these other things, and even as far back as the Iran embassy hostage thing that went on, which was right. And then when you factor in that whole October surprise thing, and Ollie North was involved in that, and you know who was involved with that too? Sturgis was involved in that too, covering that thing up. Yeah,
I mean, it's interesting how all this stuff connects, because maybe when I come back for When Prosecutors Attack, we can talk about the Iran-Contra, because there really is between Iran-Contra, the O.J. Simpson trial, and and it sounds funny when you put it all together, and the Fast and Furious. Those are all basically one continuous operation. And because the way O.J. Simpson ties in is just with the Rampart scandal and what was going on there. So we can get into all that when I come back, because all that is connected. It's all the same, the bankers, laundering drug money, basically.
Yeah, we definitely got to have you back with that, because these are all the topics I cover. OJ, Iran-Contra, Watergate, and all the assassinations. This is all my stuff. This is what we do. We cover all the time. So great. Yeah. Oh yeah. This is really good stuff. Now, one more thing too. I want to get back to with the Chapman assassination. Was that gun turned up missing? The maintenance guy picked up the gun and took it down to his basement office and put it away in a drawer. Are you familiar with that?
Right. Right. Yeah. And it's just, you just can't find it anymore. It's funny how many things really go missing in all this, right? Like, Kennedy's brain went missing after they went to the Naval Medical Center. You know what I mean? This happens repeatedly. Oh yeah. The little disc that was in Reagan, right? The little, why can't we all see pictures of that? You know what I mean? Well, that was handed to the FBI and never seen ever again. You know what I mean? So very common practice. Wow. And when something's just gone, it's one thing when you say, oh, we're not going to release certain evidence. You can have this mounting political movement to have that overturned. But when you just say, oh, it's just lost, it's gone. No one knows where it is. There's no chain of custody. It's gone. What are you going to do?
Yeah, it really is amazing how they get away with that, and more people don't. But I guess people don't talk about it, and all these distracting things come up, like with this Pope assassination, which seems so hinky at the time too. It just seems so weird, Yeah.
Yeah, that wasn't a real assassination, No. It's just, but yeah, but what's interesting too is after the fact too, you can kind of see how they jump. Because you would think that if you do try to kill the president, right, or that you just never see the light of day again.
Yeah,
you know what
right.
I mean? You just they always say if you're going to shoot the king, you better not miss. But in this case, he had a very nice life in a very nice facility, and part of the way they arranged that was through the lawyers that they used. Basically, on both ends, there's ties back to the Bush family and the Hinckley family in terms of who prosecuted him and who defended him. So it's like a whole other subject.
Yeah, we're just about to get into that. Edward Bennett Williams, right? He was even involved in Whitewater, right? Or his brother was.
Yeah, I think it was his brother. Yep.
Yeah. So why don't you describe who was Edward Bennett Williams and his brother, and who are they and their background and their law firm and their lobbyists and all that stuff they're doing?
Right. So to put it in the proper context, we've all seen on Law and Order, right, or any kind of show like that, where there's some sort of mob boss or there's some sort of criminal person, and they have their lower level people are going through the legal system, and of course they provide the lawyers, right? Because if they can provide the lawyers, then they can make sure they get the right defense. They can make sure that they avoid subjects that they don't want touched and things like that.
Right.
So what's interesting is that so Bush, when he was head of the CIA, one of their main attorneys was Edward Bennett Williams, right? And he was used to defend Hinckley, and then also to the prosecutor, and then they also had one of their buddies as the prosecutor to let me pull that information up. That was also used during Whitewater. During Watergate. Sorry, he was also used in Watergate to make sure that the Watergate guys got off easy. So the same person who prosecuted the Watergate guys were the same ones that prosecuted was Hinckley during all this, to make sure that he was basically treated all right since he was the son of one of their people.
Now, was it why? How did Edward Bennett Williams get picked for this? The judge appointed him.
Well, that's another thing too, right? Is that this was all done in chambers. This was like a special appointee. This became a big issue because they completely circumvented the normal way that it worked. Is that there was like a roster of 14 judges, and they were supposed to be picked randomly. And so instead they were. It's a little bit unclear exactly who. About exactly who just decided on the judge. But what is clear is that George Bush was in control of the situation because he had changed the rules of succession just a little bit prior to that. He had changed that basically made it so that he would be in charge in any kind of crisis situation instead of the Secretary of State.
And who was the Watergate prosecutor that was in charge of the prosecution of Hinckley?
The prosecution.
You remember?
Hold on a second. I'm sorry. I'm drawing a blank on the name. Sorry.
Okay. Hey, you want to hear something funny? I had the first lawyer for the Watergate burglars on the show. It was one of the only interviews he's ever done. Doug Caddy, and he sat right at the same desk as their desks touched each other with E. Howard Hunt. And he became the first Watergate defense attorney, right? Do you know what turns out? I got to be careful what I say because he's a Facebook friend of mine now. But that he knew everybody. He knew Guy Bannister. He knew all those guys from JFK. He was friends with before he ever got involved with this stupid company, the CIA front with E. Howard Hunt. He was friends with everybody involved in the JFK assassination. Just a coincidence, because he says.
Right, I think his son came forward and said that his father was involved in the assassination. Right?
No, I think that one you're thinking of is St. John Hunt, who's E. Howard. Yeah, his son did come forward. I've had him on the show too. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, he has great stuff to talk about. Oh, you know who his uncle was, and his godfather was who's that guy? Now I'm not going to remember. He used to have the TV show, and he was a CIA agent, and he was I'm not going to remember.
Right. Okay, so getting back to Hinckley's prosecutor, right? The guy's name was Charles Ruff, right? And Ruff prosecuted the Watergate defenders, like I mentioned before, and make sure that they got off easily. And then Hinckley's case, so it would be tried on both sides by attorneys, basically with strong allegiances to the Central Intelligence Agency, right? Because one of them was under the direct employ of George Bush while he headed the CIA, and then Charles Ruff, of course, was prosecuted the Watergate defenders.
Do we have
and then the judge even was brought in a real strange way. The judge Harrington Parker, he became the judge for Hinckley's trial.
Yeah.
In a big diversion from like how they normally do things. The Washington Post even talked about it. They said that Parker's name was secretly selected from a stack of cards that bore the names of 14 federal judges who were available. That selection process is normally carried out by a court clerk using a random mechanism. So they refer to this as a star chamber. They said the presiding judge of the Hinckley trial was selected in a star chamber session,
wow,
leading to a national outcry at the decision, summed up by what one editorial writer called one of the worst miscarriages of justice in the national history. So it's pretty interesting.
And like you said, today, Hinckley's not even in that mental institution anymore, right? They give him passes to get out and walk around and do stuff.
No. That's how it was for years. But now they've been letting him out more and more. And now he basically lives on his own and he has to check in once a week. So he's basically a free man. He's a free man with a therapist basically at this point.
And did he ever get married or anything?
No. I don't believe so. You think he works at Starbucks or something like that, which I don't really quite understand because the family has money. But I think that might be part of his arrangement that he has like a normal routine or something like that.
So John Hinckley, who shot President Ronald Reagan, works at Starbucks?
Works at Starbucks making macchiatos. Something like that. That's at least the story. You know what I mean? A lot of times these people don't show up. They're no-show jobs.
Right,
you know what I mean?
Right.
But he needs to show that he has a routine and so forth. So that's what's on his what was on his release papers.
Now, are there any indications that Reagan was aware of who tried to have him killed? Or Nancy?
Right. Well, he not really, because see, here's what happened, right? It's like afterwards, I think he got the message because Reagan really, he started to allow trilateral appointments. He basically gave over a lot of the presidency to Bush. But the tension between them, I think was even written about in a recent story about the Bush dynasty. Book where they talk about how how much tension there was between the Bush and the Reagan family. So he never trusted him. He never really wanted him too close, but he did end up having to allow him to make all his trilateral appointments. I think he really did fear for his life. I think after that point, they proved that they could get to him very easily.
And so he gave him a lot.
That's my take on it that I put in the implication section of the book.
And what about people like Al Haig? How does he fit into all this? Because remember how he ran down and says, "I'm in charge." What do you know about that?
Right. So Al Haig, I believe, was the one who was really not so happy with the Bush's rearrangement of the order of succession. Right.
Yeah.
Because he I'm just trying to keep all the names straight. But I believe that he was, he was opposed to it, but really, he couldn't do anything about it. And they did change the way the succession worked so that, like I said, he was in control for a little while until Bush came, off of the plane basically. And everything was the vice president got to decide how to handle it and how to pursue, how to pursue the investigation. And he basically had full control over all that. Which is really interesting because if you're the assassin, if you're the one, planning the assassination and now you also have control of the investigation after the fact, kind of puts you in a good position.
Where was Bush that day when the attempt took place?
Where Bush, that's That's a good question. I'm not sure about that, actually.
Yeah, why don't we know that? Isn't it? Wouldn't that be like one of those things you'd know right off the top of your head? You know, it's like
yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know that I would take his word on it anyway. I mean, like I said, he was not in Dallas. You know, the day Kennedy was shot, he was not in Dallas until he was in Dallas, and then you know what I mean. Like, there's multiple versions of where he was at each point. You know.
So you have here on one of the pages you sent me was international travel for John Hinckley. What can you tell us about that?
For John Hinckley. So John Hinckley was, like we said, through World Vision, he he in Laos, and he was in the refugee, where the refugees were supposed to be,
right.
And then it's unclear whether or not he, basically from Laos, Mark David Chapman went to Lebanon where there was a civil war. Then he becomes the key aide to the program director, David Moore. And then he's meeting with Gerald Ford. And then he runs the Vietnamese refugee camp over at Fort Chaff in Arkansas at the National Guard base. And then he basically was there until he went into a mental ward facility. Then Hinckley separates from Chapman from Laos, and then he comes back into the States, and that's when he starts stalking Carter, and then he ends up in a Colorado mental facility. Now, what's interesting is that there is some connection to Iran-Contra that you brought up before,
okay, because
both World Vision has a lot of operations in Honduras and El Salvador. So again, if you kind of take the understanding that the government, or aspects of the government, I should say, were involved in drug running as they were, under the CIA or certain elements of the CIA. And, organizations like this are perfect for getting assets. And so they were very active in Honduras and El Salvador.
Now, the Hinckley family, right? Are there any indications that after this attempt that they rose higher in power, or perhaps had to lay low? What happened with them?
Right. So I think if they would have been successful, right, I think that that they would have gotten lots of favors from George Bush. But basically, their company had already been made whole, and so they kind of went off into the sunset more. They didn't really rise to power as much. But as you can see, they were. They planned they planned basically a victory dinner that turned into too much media attention. And so, that was really the end of their two main means of power, which was the Vanderbilt Energy and World Vision. But World Vision continued to receive funding, all through the Reagan years and through Bush's one term as president.
And what's going on with World Vision today? They still exist?
Yeah, they still exist. They're still an entity. On their website, even like a lot of this information we started to get from their website in terms of where they get their funding and stuff like that. It's not even really hidden, because that's the whole thing, right? Is that like, who's going to really hassle World Vision? You know what I mean? Like, who's going to care about the millions that are flowing to them, right? It's, it kind of becomes a non-issue,
Now, Neil Bush, he was the one who ripped off the savings and loans, right?
Right. Yeah. So that all occurred under Bush in his first term. I mean, they kind of place they have the public sons and then they have the private sons.
Right.
Neil was on the banking side, and then obviously, that other one was put over right before 9/11. And I don't know how much you guys get into 9/11 on this show, but yeah, that was a major money making. Those are two major money making periods for the Bush family.
Right.
The savings and loan, and then what happened after 9/11. So Neil Bush, was really trying to, and that's the thing, is that you never see these people publicly. They're never going to run for office. You know what I mean? You just see the two public sons that are, and again, George W. Bush, they presented that he was in oil, right? And that ran their oil business. But again, that is really more of a CIA front than anything else. They really have not had real legitimate businesses. It's basically just been banking and these oil companies that are really a front for CIA money laundering and just general operations.
Yeah, and at the end of Bush Jr., Bush W., at the end of his presidency, he does his banking bailout, quote unquote, where basically we just give away billions of dollars to rich bankers who lost their money. And then, what's his name? Obama doesn't miss a beat. He just says, oh, yeah, we're going to keep giving it away when he comes in.
Yeah. That's anyone who thinks that there's two separate warring parties really needs to look at the deals that occurred during that time period, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things, and I was actually knew this guy's nephew, but if you look at the deal through, it was the one where basically Fiat, you know how Chrysler ended up in the hands of Fiat?
Yeah. I don't
know
the details, but what? Is there something significant about that?
Yeah. Well, the significant thing is that the Treasury Secretary that was under Bush, now mind you, that deal occurred under Obama, right? So, if he was against, if he wasn't in the same bed as them, he would have opposed this deal, because the deal was basically just a means of giving the Treasury Secretary's consulting company that he formed basically like $100 million, right? Just to arrange the government basically giving Chrysler to Fiat, because I believe the government even put up the money, like they loaned Fiat the money in order for them to buy Chrysler. You know what I mean? So this wasn't really anything. It wasn't like foreign money was really coming in to help this situation. It really was just a complete robbing of an entire car company. Also, that the Treasury Secretary from one administration could pull out $100 million, in his consulting company arranging the deal.
Well, it seems
so
like
a lot of those deals went down, like that,
Oh yeah, and even with the whole bailout too, that because a lot of those mortgages there was already mortgage insurance that they paid off all those mortgages, and then we just bailed out and it was the insurance company that was run by that other by Bush's vice president, that little kid that couldn't spell potato. What was his name again? Dan Quayle.
Dan Quayle.
Yeah, right. I remember that he was like a little kid. When they brought in a little kid, he looks like me. I was my age.
Well, Dan. Not to get conspiratorial, but Dan Quayle was a little bit set up. You know what I mean? There's two ways to spell potato, and they handed him like the unusual method in the card. You know what I mean? But anyway, I know what you mean.
Hey, what about Quayle? Did he have any CIA connections? Because he went to work for ING after that. But what the CIA connections with him?
Gotta keep in mind that there's I think he had more intelligence connections, because like they're in the same way that there's like a revolving door between the food companies and the food food regulations and all that. Yeah. It's the same way with the military industrial complex, how you have that revolving door of generals and all that. In the same way, when you think of banking, you have to think intelligence. So it's the banking intelligence complex, right? And so I don't know that he was tied to intelligence as much as banking, but it's kind of all one continuous thing,
Yeah, well, yeah, because when he went out, he's a big shot now, but I think it's ING, right? One of the insurance companies or something, mortgage insurance he controls. And they made that deal on the golf course,
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was saying, they made that whole deal to bail out those banks on the golf course,
Right.
Playing golf with these characters. But it looks like I don't buy that the deal, I believe that was kind of the plan all along. You know what I'm saying? Like, it wasn't, like a thing that sprung up because they had overextended themselves. It was just their plan from the beginning. And what's interesting too is that most people think of the bailout as being like a $900 billion thing, right? Yeah.
But again, the TARP is even separate from what they gave to AIG, right? That's remember, AIG was basically. AIG basically really didn't receive very much money. Because they received a ton of money that just flowed directly to Goldman Sachs. I mean, that's why AIG was bailed out and Lehman Brothers was not, because of who was their client. AIG's client was Goldman Sachs. Lehman Brothers' client was like lower level rich people. You know what I'm saying? That didn't, that weren't high enough up on the food chain. And so there was the TARP money, there was the money going to AIG, and then on top of that, which everyone kind of misses, is through the Federal Reserve operations. It was like something along the lines of like $20 trillion that was lent to them, something along those lines. And it's just an enormous sum, and most of it's still sitting with them that hasn't really flowed into the economy, and a lot of it has been lent back to the government all through the rest of the Obama years. And I assume it's still going on now. So it was really just an enormous amount of wealth that was shipped around.
And, right. And in order to create that crisis, the housing crisis as well, they first had to change the bankruptcy laws, and to further squeeze people that couldn't pay their mortgages. You're right. The whole thing was created from the start. And there was a manipulation too with the interest rate.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if you're going to have central banking, you're going to have this type of thing. But this was obviously amplified to such a degree. And I mean, the reason I say it is because if you don't have, if you don't have a free market interest rate, right, that means you really cannot arrange capital. You know what I mean? Like, the market's not functioning at all. So the market is just guessing at whether or not they should build long-term projects or whether they should only focus on short-term projects. There's no coordination with the interest rate. So you're going to have this, but it didn't need to be as large as it was. And those entities did not need to be bailed out. I mean, they could have just, think about it. If Goldman Sachs went under, they made it like we wouldn't be able to get money out of the ATMs because, because one investment banker went bankrupt. It was really absurd,
Yeah, the story said that they were telling Congress that there was going to be martial law, there'd be riots in the streets, all kind of stuff, in order to terrify these naive congressmen. I would be so fascinated to know what you do for a living and stuff, what your background is. Now, I use my real name, and everyone knows me, but you use a pseudonym. But then you emailed me. I got your phone number. I got your email. I could find out who you are. What's
Yeah. I'm fine with you knowing about it. I just don't like to make it to the public. So we could definitely talk about that privately.
Right. The general public, yeah.
But yeah, my current business requires that I'm not associated with this. So I mean that will probably change in the future, but.
Okay, I
for at least the next year until cryptocurrency retires me later this year. I'll need to keep it like that.
Maybe you could advise me on that because I can't even set up an account. I couldn't even get it. I tried one of those Bitcoin companies. I forget which one, and I can't get verified. My phone number. They won't verify me.
Right.
To even get started.
Oh yeah. And then you got to make sure you're with a bank that it won't close your accounts because I've heard of that happening where accounts will be closed just because you made a connection with something with cryptocurrency. And yeah, that's another thing too, because, the banks are really deathly afraid. I don't know if you follow what like Jamie, in the cryptocurrency world, they call him Jamie Dimon, but I believe his name is Jamie Dimon or something like that.
Not at all.
Basically the head of the Chase, the head of Chase comes out and he says, Bitcoin is a scam. It's a Ponzi scheme and all this kind of business, right? Then the price of Bitcoin tanks. Then it comes out that his investment banking wing or whatever has clients where they're buying them up cryptocurrency assets. You know what I mean? That JP Morgan is basically buying up cryptocurrency assets. So
and they wanted to manipulate the value, make it go down cheaper.
Yeah, exactly. So he was basically getting a sale for his clients, and I'm sure some of their own money. But yeah, that's some pretty dirty stuff. So, he's usually referred to as Jamie Dimon in the cryptocurrency circles.
And you're actually making money on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like this whole crash has been really good, for people that know what they're doing. You know what I mean? Because, there was just a ton of opportunity and there's one of the cool things about cryptocurrency is just the new projects that are able to get attention and, quickly get funding without having to go through all the SEC regulations, things like that. So there's a lot of growth still with smaller companies, smaller coins and things like that. And I mean it's been working out pretty well. I make more from it than my regular profession, so to speak.
Okay, great. Let me ask you a question back to the Hinckley thing with Nelson Rockefeller. What became of him after all this? If his gambit there failed, what went on with his career after all this?
Right. So, we don't see the Rockefellers in elective office. There's just, they do have one senator. So I think that's what they kind of do is the family members that aren't great at the backroom dealing, they'll put, one guy from, I think, West Virginia or something, they have one senator, over there. He was the guy that maybe we shouldn't have, he was regretting
I wonder
that there was the internet because you couldn't control the information as easily, And I don't know if he's not hearing or whatever, but he was lamenting the fact that the internet exists. And so the rest of the family, what they do is they set up organizations to have power from behind the scenes. And really, if you put ego aside, it really is more effective to have power behind the scenes. There's nothing like having the absolute power of being the actual president. But they eventually gave that up. And chose to, rule from behind. So if you see the operations of the Rockefeller, David Rockefeller, right?
Yeah.
You see that he has hundreds and hundreds of organizations. I can't believe how much attention the Koch brothers get for the little bits of money that they give, compared to what the Rockefellers are up to. You know what I mean? And
David Rockefeller died, right? He just died recently, right?
What?
David Rockefeller just died, right?
Right. Yeah, he just passed. But while he was alive, he had the Association of Pan American Cooperation or something. He had like hundreds of these very innocuous sounding organizations that were meant to basically integrate the economies of Latin America with the United States under not a free trade, but like under that's the whole thing is that the whole NAFTA thing and the whole I think misunderstanding with the free trade stuff is that there's nothing free about the trade. If you had free trade in North America, you could write that bill on one piece of paper, right? We're not going to have any tariffs or duties for any trading in North America. You know what I mean? But instead, they're like, they require volumes and volumes of legalese to go through because they're really creating what is really managed trade. Where they have their special interests all set up to benefit from the way it's set up.
Yeah, when I was a kid coming up, it was David Rockefeller was the one you would point to all the time. Like now they point to Soros and all this kind of stuff like that, but it was Rockefeller when you would always point to David Rockefeller and his power. And one of the reasons why is because I can remember it like it was yesterday. I was watching a Jimmy Carter news conference, and they asked him, well, why did you let the Shah of Iran come into the country? And he says, well, David Rockefeller told me. He pretty much came right out and says, David Rockefeller told me to. Yep.
Well, yeah, and then there's a Hillary Clinton speech where she was saying how good it was about how the, not the Trilateral Commission, but the other one, the
Council
on Foreign Relations, right?
Yeah.
About how CFR had moved their offices closer to the State Department. And she said, it's really convenient because now we can come here more easily to get our marching orders.
Oh, really? Wow.
Right? Yep. There's a speech where she talks about her getting her marching orders from the Council on Foreign Relations. That's no joke. Yep. Absolutely.
Oh, boy.
And, so...
well, you see her, when she by the way, she was involved in Watergate, too. She goes back to Watergate. And you see pictures of her when she's really young with Henry Kissinger, where she's like right out of college. And she's hanging out with Henry Kissinger. So, and by the way,
go ahead.
Don't they have Christmas together every year at the Henry Kissinger and the Clintons?
Yeah, I think that's right. And then the Bushes also like the Bushes and the Clintons vacation together.
Oh yeah, well,
you know what I mean? Yeah. I mean, obviously, the Bushes were against Trump this whole past election cycle.
Well, it seems like there was a CIA thread. First it was Bush, then Clinton was running coke for the CIA out of Mena, Arkansas, and then even Obama, Bush Jr., obviously, and then even Obama went to work for the CIA right out of college, Business International.
Right, his first job was with Henry Kissinger for Obama, and that's a whole other thing. And what's interesting too is like I don't know if you know what Bush's, but Bill Clinton's first official job was out of law school. Like on record that he admits to his first job was Attorney General of Arkansas. Oh. Right? Because what they did is they basically made he basically ran unopposed. You know what I mean? He was given the Democrat nomination for it, and they got the Republicans not to run or something like that. And he was basically just granted the position, just straight. That's his first job. You get a law degree, and you're the Attorney General of Arkansas. And then based on that, he was fast tracked into the governorship. So, I mean, they were working on him from the beginning.
Yeah.
They talk about him being in Russia for 2 years, and they try to make it like it was a communist thing, but really it was just intelligence operations, right? He was just an intelligence operative that they pulled in. William Jefferson Clinton isn't even his name. Like, it's amazing how many of the presidents are born with totally different names than we know them as, So I forget what his birth name is, but like Clinton is a name that's not his father's name. That's just a name he assumed. One of his mother's men was named Clinton. So anyway, he was a CIA asset, and he was in Russia for 2 years. But I think he may not even been in Russia. It was just a very easy way to put it into the left-right paradigm.
Right.
You know what I mean? Where it's like, oh, okay, yeah, he's a commie, so, that kind of thing. And so, then it could be hashed out on that front rather than on a conspiratorial front. But then he comes back and he's the Attorney General, and then becomes governor. And, it's funny because in primary colors, they make it like it was a nail biter getting the nomination. But if you look at the electoral map, I mean, it was a total obliteration. They moved aside. They pushed everybody else aside and, anointed him, selected him for that position.
Fascinating. Oh, by the way, too, Obama was involved in that little house, that tiny house deal in Haiti that the whole Clinton Foundation stole all that money. Obama was involved in that when he was a senator. He was involved in that deal. Okay, before he was president. Yeah, fascinating. You can just go on forever. But back to this whole Bush-Hinckley and stuff like that, because we'll have you back and we'll get into all this other stuff. Nelson Rockefeller, what about his death in New York? What do you know about that? Because that was bizarre, too.
Bizarre how? What do you mean?
Well, because they moved his body. First, they said he was in his office and he was having an affair and all this kind of stuff like that. And the medical examiner was one of these shady guys too, Nagachi, one of these guys. Did you look into that at all?
Yeah, I think that's just controlling the messaging. I don't think he was killed like like Scalia was. You remember Scalia? He died under he was basically at like a lodge. He's at one of these, I don't know what you want to call them, not occult lodges, but you know what I mean?
Yeah. Like a Mason
where they have like like a masonry type hunting, that was mainly used for hunting and all that. And, so yeah, but I mean, I don't think anyone's knocking off the Rockefellers, if that's what you're going with, but I'm sure he died in some unsavory fashion that they just wanted to control the messaging on.
Okay. Let's see.
In all looking into this, I've never seen the any of the Rockefeller family get taken out.
So now, we've had this dynasty, a CIA dynasty, starting from Bush, Clinton, Obama. What do you make of Trump then? Right.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think it's fairly safe to say that they really did not want him to become president. I mean, they really pulled out all the stops. You know what I mean? To make that not happen. But again, I think this comes into the fact that, sometimes when you conspiracy in the world and you start to chart all the incredible, evil things that they've been able to accomplish, you start to think that they're all powerful, but they're really not. And I think that this was one of those things where they just pushed it too far. They thought, they started to believe their own propaganda that they were all powerful. And got pushed back. You know what I mean? Now, at the same token, I don't know if they're going to assassinate him or not. It's like it's not like Reagan, right? Where Reagan was just a personality. You know what I mean? In this case, there's very specific policy that's tied to the brand of Trump. So if they kill him, it's very easy to solidify that into martyrdom. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it's hard to imagine him living out 2 terms. But then again, he does play ball to a degree, to a very large degree, and they're making a ton of money. I mean, just from the economy, from all the optimism of all the of everyone right now. You know what I'm saying? the growth that we're seeing and stuff like that. So, I mean, it's one of those things where they do want to control every aspect of it, but they also benefit from when people get a breath. You know what I mean? When people are allowed to breathe, like with the internet or today with cryptocurrency, when they allow a certain area to just be unregulated and let people do their thing, there is an enormous amount of wealth that gets generated from that, and then they can try and tax it. So I don't really think that the whole opposition to Trump was a charade. I think that goes a little too far in the conspiracy spectrum. But I don't know. What's your take on that?
Well, if you look, he surrounded himself by Goldman Sachs, right? Wilbur Ross, who's out of the Rothschild, right? And then you got ExxonMobil running the foreign policy. It seems like he's bought and sold by the same characters. He's got Henry Kissinger sitting in the Oval Office there more than once. The same day he's meeting with the Russians. Same business as usual.
Yeah, like I said, I mean, he's not gonna end the Fed, so to speak. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's certainly not going to happen. Right. What? If there's a wall at the end of it all, like if there actually is a wall, and there's before his next term, I think he will get reelected, and it's going to be hard to kind of, obviously, yeah, he is playing ball with all those actors. I mean, all those actors too can tank the economy on him. So, you know what I mean? It's really hard. I think the jury's still kind of out a little bit on the Trump front. You know what I mean? They certainly don't like him, but he certainly is playing ball to a large degree, like you said.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't see him as any kind of a hero, kind of help.
Right.
Especially when he goes back to Iran-Contra too, because he was buddies with Adnan Khashoggi.
Oh, yeah. Well, what's interesting about his brand, and the reason why I think he was hard to take down, was just simply that he kind of was just real upfront. Like, hey, he basically came out like, I've been bribing politicians for decades.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, and I know how it works. Like, so like, how do you come out with a scandal with someone when they start off with, I've been bribing, presidents and congressmen my whole life. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, man, 7 divorces, whatever, and porn stars. He's dating porn stars and stuff like that.
Right.
Right.
Right. So, I mean, I think there's a certain aspect to it, like where, it's like, I don't know how far would a president have to take it before, before we would think that he's not a total shill. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's a kind of a hard problem to solve. You know what I mean? Just mentally. I mean, if you could picture what would be that standard, so to speak. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do know what you mean. But whatever, we're living in the most chaotic times I think we've ever had in the history of this country. Even Watergate, which I lived through, and Iran-Contra and all that stuff, just seems like this.
Yeah, I mean, and they're trying with it. I mean, every different angle they're trying to do a Watergate type situation. Well, and that's the thing you have to understand too, right? Is that Nixon was not a great guy, right? Like, like none of these people are great people. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Like, I wouldn't trust my kids with any of these people. You know what I'm saying? But they are warring interests. You know what I mean? And I think that the interplay between Nixon and the Rockefellers, where they were cooperating but also adversarial, is a very real thing, and I think that's what's playing out right now.
Right. Very interesting. I'm going to hit you with a total left field. Did you look into Pizzagate?
Yes, absolutely. I was going to bring it up because when you brought up Haiti, right?
Right.
Because Hillary Clinton had there's all these emails that came out with, and it's interesting that they did not deny the validity of any of the emails, right? They when they were all coming out, and there's a reason for that, right? Like, the people that actually know the H key thing, like they can establish that they're real. And so instead they kind of claim, they're being used for political purposes. Well, of course they're being used for political purposes. You're politicians, But anyway, it came out that she was actively campaigning for the release of a child trafficker in Haiti. There's this woman, because the reason the Clinton Foundation deals in countries where there are not really birth certificates, where they don't really have that type of documentation. So it's not expected when they bring people that they'll have documentation, right? Yeah. And so she had a child trafficker that she got basically released from jail in Haiti, who was arrested for child trafficking for picking up underage kids and bringing them to
the earthquake. She called them orphans, but they had parents, they had families, and then her attorney as well had a conviction for child molestation. That woman, I forget the woman's name, but it's amazing what they're doing down in Haiti. They're just cleaning that place out.
Yeah, and I mean, you say they have parents, but there's no documents. That's why they pick those countries.
Right. Well, I did a whole thing on foreign adoptions too. It's oh my God, when the kids get to this country too.
Oh yeah.
And
think about it too. The Russians, Putin knows what's going on too, right? Because why do you think that he doesn't allow American adoption? Partially because of in my opinion, that's of course speculation, but I think it has something to do with the fact that the child trafficking is such a huge topic. And I think that so I think Pedogate is more of a real thing than Pizzagate itself. Like that Pizzagate thing may have been set up just as a red herring, right? So just as like hey, let's create something that's that looks as least sinister as possible, but still being strange. You know what I'm saying? Like having a pizza parlor is a non-threatening kind of thing. You know what I mean? Pizza parlors are very like disarming locations when you think about them. And so they send someone in there with a gun and stuff like that. I believe that was a false flag in and of itself, where they send someone in there to delegitimize the whole subject. Because you know how someone went in there and said, "Oh, show me where the kids are kept," and that kind of thing. Yeah, that doesn't really sound like someone that would be a listener to your show. You know what I mean? Like when I heard the things he was saying, it sounds like someone who is a plant. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but there's guys on 4chan and stuff like that are out there like that. Anyway, what about QAnon? You believe in this QAnon stuff? You know what I'm saying?
QAnon, what's that?
Oh, okay, good. You're not familiar with it. Thank God for that, man. It's obviously role-playing nonsense. This guy claims to have a Q-level security clearance, and he's releasing all these clues and nonsense. And there's thousands of people.
Oh, QAnon.
Right? There's thousands of people that believe that. And one of those guys, and they're all talking about their guns and their patriots, and they're all going to resist unless, they're all saying that,
Yeah, right.
That's terrifying, man. I'm a little worried about what I'm still there's a lot of agitation going on here,
Yeah, and when you start talking about like 4chan and stuff, it's hard to see what's real and what's them just trolling, right? Because I mean, I don't know if you've seen the whole like how like they've turned milk into like a symbol of where like they got liberals to say that milk was a symbol of white power, and because whites are the least lactose intolerant, like whites can handle lactose more than the other races,
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, and so they said that, it's a symbol of white power, but that was all started from 4chan guys trolling them and being like, hey, I bet we can get them to say that that's the case. Then they also started to circulate the OK sign. When you say OK to somebody,
right.
They're saying that like the up fingers are W and then the circle is P for power,
Right.
And so then when like Trump's kids would have an OK sign, everyone would say, oh, look, he's giving a dog whistle to white nationalists. It'd be like
yeah, there's so much disinfo out there and confusing things, and dredging up problems and confusion and agitating people. Yeah, we're in bad times.
Counterintelligence.
Yeah, right. Oh, I could tell you some stuff firsthand. People trying to insert things into me in my life in this show and stuff. It's just.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. Forget it. Anyway, man. So we'll definitely have you back.
Now, well, that's one thing I'll just say is that, like, you'd be surprised how many low-level actors are in all this, right? So it's like even if you're not like on Fox News or whatever,
right?
Like there's they got it down to the level where they have correct the record. If you heard of the PCR call, where they'll even go on message boards and put they'll have these bots that put out their message.
Yeah, something happened with your phone. Did you move it or something? Like, it's getting all weird.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
I'm sorry. Just my connection.
That's better now, yeah. Yeah, correct the record. Isn't that, they're connected with Brock, right? And Brock was dating Alefantis at Pizzagate.
Yeah, I think correct the record started around the Clintons and then got used kind of for just general Democrat operations.
Yeah, so there's
Go ahead.
There's one theory that Alefantis could be a CIA operation. That's why he's not getting busted. Because you can't say there's no smoke there, because I know you laugh about the infidelity investigation, but I do a lot of criminal investigations, criminal defense, and also child custody, family court stuff. And if I could investigate someone and find that stuff on his Instagram, stuff with tying kids down, holding babies, talking about chicken lover, all that kind of stuff, he would lose custody of his kids in any court in his country unless he totally had everybody paid off. So you can't say there's no
any sane court,
Yeah, it's crazy.
I think that guy's absolutely protected. But the question is whether he was ever an integral part of any kind of child trafficking or not. And I think it kind of doesn't matter because the child trafficking is going on. And so he was either used as
your phone's
red herring.
Your phone's screwing up again.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. What are you doing with the phone? You put it in your pocket or something?
I'm not changing anything. It must be just
okay, you're good now. Now, Adam, because you only got a few minutes left, out of all your other books, give us an idea of the other books you've written and what they're about, because you got about 3 minutes left.
Sure. So, When Prosecutors Attack is basically that was done during the Zimmerman trial. So there's a bit in there about the Zimmerman, but it's my main passion that brought me into this field was the O.J. Simpson trial. Okay. So that's all about how there were multiple government confidential informants around that case and the drug running there. Then there's the Oregon shooting, just another CIA false flag, and that's all about that shooting and about how fake blood was employed and how that may have not been a real shooting sort of thing. And so we go in and address that topic. Then we have some funner books. There's a book, 25 Things Women Can't Do, but we pretend they can. But that's really just kind of about like some of the MRA issues and stuff like that, where, there's so much focus on the wage gap, but not the death gap. You know what I mean? And they are related, 93% of workplace deaths for men, and, kind of goes through some of those MRA issues.
I'm not familiar with the Oregon shooting at all. What is that about?
Yeah, well, take a look at the book. Basically, there's just a lot of strange things that happened. They replaced the leadership. They retired one of the heads of that university before the shooting, and he had talked about the Sandy Hook shooting, and so I think they got him out of the way, and certain things like that.
Okay. Thank you so much. Niles Mercado, the book we talked about today was Bush Killing Reagan, the Bush-Hinckley Conspiracy Bill O'Reilly Won't Tell About. Now, do you have a website or anything when people can get a hold of you?
Yeah, on Twitter, at Corruption Show. At Corruption Show.
Okay, so Twitter.
I used to have a radio show, too.
Oh, you do? Really?
I did. I used to.
Okay. Are you interested in doing another one?
Yeah, we'll see. We'll talk.
Okay, good. Yeah, we'll definitely keep in touch. Thank you so much. Niles Mercado, thank you so much.
No problem. My pleasure.
Good night. Okay, then we had Niles Mercado. You can find his book on the Opperman Report bookstore, Bush Killing Reagan, the Bush-Hinckley Conspiracy Bill O'Reilly Won't Tell About. You can find his this really good PDF he sent me. Has colored pictures and stuff like that. Let me do that real quick. That is sixfigureteam.com/Reagan, and they'll email you a link where you can download this stuff and print it out, even colored copies that's in the book. If you enjoyed the show, check out OppermanReport.com. We just uploaded a brand new secret lost episode. I had a guest on. He didn't want me to play the show, but we're putting it in the member section secretly, unadvertising what the show is about. You can get it there at OppermanReport.com. Oh, boy. Really enjoyed this guy. Really enjoyed our guest in Niles Mercado. You never know what you're going to get. Because I was a little worried about all this false flag stuff, but this is some good, solid work. And I checked him out a little bit while we were, because I do have his phone number, I have his email, and I looked him up. And he seems to be a pretty legit guy. Has a lot of different businesses and things going on here. So we'll talk to him a little bit more off the air. I didn't want to throw him a left curveball there, and I hate doing that, especially when we're talking about Chapman, Mark David Chapman. I hate to bring up the fact that I met Mark David Chapman the weekend of the assassination, because then people say, they're not ready for that. And there's a guy's a guest, he comes on the show to talk about Hinckley and Chapman and all this kind of stuff like that, and he's not ready to hear, I don't want to take over the interview either. But I firmly believe that there were two Chapmans, and I believe there's a much more occult connection too in the John Lennon assassination. If you go back in my archives on YouTube and look for the show I did with Rod Harrell, might have been Farrell, his name. But there's just so much there with there was a CIA agent who was working as a doorman there, Jose Padermo. There were two cops right around the corner when the call came into the shooting. But when they got to the scene of the crime, there was already cops there. There was a photographer there who his dream was to become a police officer. He was working as a security guard, and he was taking pictures. That famous picture, took that famous picture. And then he became a photographer after that. He didn't go into law enforcement. He didn't stay in security. He went into photography because, quote unquote, people like the Beach Boys wanted me to come down and take their picture after he took a picture of right before Lennon got murdered. There's a lot of strange, bizarre stuff and all that whole Chapman Lennon murder. But once again, our guest today was Bush Killing Reagan, the Bush-Hinckley conspiracy. Bill O'Reilly won't talk about Niles Mercado. And new content up at OppermanReport.com. You can check out. I'm interviewing tomorrow. We're doing a show about, I got Mark Ebner. I'm going to be interviewing later on today. And he's written some incredible books, 6 Degrees of Paris Hilton. We're going to be talking about David Blaine and the sexual allegations against him. We're going to be talking about Harvey Weinstein and all this stuff going on in Hollywood, this Me Too stuff, and Kevin Spacey. I think we might even get into a little bit of Trump stuff there, too, as well. Anyway, so that's at OppermanReport.com. If you want to advertise, you can get a hold of us, too, at OppermanReport@gmail.com. We'll be adding some new stations. I'm adding a station down in Florida and hopefully Seattle. So you want to lock in those cheap rates now. This is the time to do it. So that's about it. Thank you so much. Tune in next week. I got a show coming up about the Falcon and the Snowman. I got Gretchen Bonaducci, the wife of Danny Bonaducci. She's coming on the show. There's one more I got coming up a week after that. I forget what it is right now. I don't think I can remember, but we got some good stuff coming up. And now a word from our sponsors. You can have your ad played here at OppermanReport.com. Every Friday night, 5 p.m., and Saturday night, 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And on Friday nights, too, we do a live portion for 1 hour that I just do a live monologue. The ads are very, very inexpensive, and they're also played in the Opperman Report member section. In the member section, you can find all kinds of exclusive content that you won't find anywhere else. It's as cheap as $6 a month, $20 a quarter, or $75 for a year. If you contact me directly at OppermanReport@gmail.com, I'll set you up with a little special deal there where you get a discount if you PayPal me directly, and you even get a copy of my book. I want to thank Sean Duff at strawmanmusic.com. He's an excellent musician. And I also want to thank William Ramsey, who helps us to produce the show and book guests, who's an excellent author at William Ramsey Investigates on YouTube. Don't forget, the show is brought to you by pscoco.com. Phoebe Sod is an independent curator with the Cocoa Exchange. The Cocoa Exchange is formerly known as Dove Chocolate Discoveries, and they make the finest silky smooth chocolate because the products start with the best cocoa beans, which are tested for quality and flavor by expert technicians. The Cocoa Exchange offers not just premium chocolates, but anything from sauces and spices to brownie and cake mixes, and even coffee and martini mixes. If you wish to treat yourself or someone you love to a sweet and tasty gift, then the Cocoa Exchange is the brand for you. So you go to pscoco.com, you click on the Shop Now button. You can see all their beautiful chocolates. You can order it right now tonight. It could be in your mailbox in a couple of days. Or if you want to get into the chocolate business, you want to be a chocolatier just like Phoebe Sod, click the Contact Us button, and you can learn how to get your own website, go into the cocoa chocolate business, and sell chocolate and make a little bit of money there. I want to welcome a newest sponsor, SubashTechnosis.com. Subash Technosis is a search engine optimization and website design company. They're located in India, so you know you're going to save a lot of money and get top quality service. They offer all sorts of business process outsourcing, data entry, banking BPO services, recruitment process outsourcing, software testing, offshoring research network, customer care, press release, content writing, and distribution, and much, much more. Now, you can get a hold of Subash Technosis by email at info@subashtechnosis.com. Their website is www.subashtechnosis.com, and their Skype is ANUSHASUBASH. Remember, all these shows on Awake are brought to you by emailrevealer.com. You can go to emailrevealer.com and get a copy of my book, How to Become a Successful Private Investigator.
We also do all kind of different services for you. An online dating service investigation. It's called an online infidelity investigation. And that's where you give us your husband or your boyfriend, your girlfriend's email address, and we trace it back to their online dating websites, and we return a list of all the dating sites that email is registered to. We can expand on that investigation and trace it back to porn sites, escort service sites, swinger sites, gambling websites, and even prescription drug websites. If you think your ex-husband or something is addicted to prescription medication or involved in an extreme online pornography addiction, we can produce a report for you that you can use in court. Adoption investigations. If you want to locate your birth parents or your birth child you gave away for adoption, we can do adoption investigations for you. Asset searches for you. Locate bank accounts, hidden assets, hidden properties, hidden income, all different kinds of services in the asset search investigation. Email tracing. If you need to locate or identify somebody from just an email address, we can do an email trace investigation for you. And all kinds of digital forensics, computer and cell phone digital forensics, where we can recover deleted content from an email or a hard drive and produce a report for you that you can use in court. That's emailrevealer.com, or you can contact me at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com.